This meeting can be viewed on local cable, Spectrum and channel cable, channel 6, and AT&T UVerse channel 99. You may also stream online through our website, www.glendale.california.gov, by scrolling all the way to the bottom of the web page and selecting live streaming, which is the third icon from the left. For public comments and questions during the meeting, please call 818-937-8100, as you can see on top of the screen. Please do not call in advance of the agenda item. City staff will be submitting these questions and comments in real time to the appropriate person during this special meeting. With this being said, may I have roll call, please?
Councilmember Brotman,
Here.
Devine,
Here.
Kasakian,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Mayor Agajanian.
Present. Thank you. Next item, please.
The agenda for the Tuesday, May 12, 2020 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Tuesday, May 5, 2020 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. Next item, please.
1, community development regarding 340 North Central Avenue, Stage 1 and 2 design review for proposed 3-story commercial office building, case number PDR 1920855, continued from May 5th, 2020. 1 would be motion approving Stage 1 design.
Ms. Yasmin Beers, please.
Yes, Mayor.
Mr. Mayor and Madam City Manager, I'd like to make a comment before you guys get into this issue.
Please, go ahead.
So in compliance with our campaign disclosure requirements, one of the individuals associated with this project, Mr. Alan Malikian, who is the architect for this, who I have known for many years. He's been city commissioner. He has made a contribution to my campaign to city council, and for that reason, I'm recusing myself from this discussion, and I will see you all later this evening. Are there any questions from my colleagues or from staff before I do so?
Any questions? Okay, no? Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. City Manager Yasmin Beers.
Yes, Mayor Agajanian, members of the City Council, we are going to go directly to Ms. Ezati, who is our planner with Community Development, and she will take you through the PowerPoint presentation that is before you on the screen as well as on the dais. With that, Ms. Ezati.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council. This is an application for combined Stage 1 and 2 design review for the project site located at 340 North Central Avenue. The proposal is to construct a 48-foot
Excuse
tall...
me.
Yes.
What's the policy to take the stage 1 and 2 together, or take the stage 1 and then go to stage 2? What's our policy? I'm trying to...
We do allow applicants to submit for both at the same time, to do a combined Stage 1 and 2 design review.
Because generally, as an engineer, we go to the stage 1, giving an idea that what it's going to be. Stage 2, you go further into the design. That's why, anyway, you want to explain?
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, as Mrs. Zadi said, we typically would allow a developer the option, if they wanted to get a preliminary take from the City Council, they would take a Stage 1 massing, scale massing, access, site planning, and then they would go and develop that further. The project here is relatively small, and it really wouldn't do to take a Stage 1. You can't get much different than what you have here. And so they elected for Stage 1 and 2.
Okay, but I mean, based on my...
And then there's a Stage 3.
Good, yes.
Is that correct?
Right.
Technically, the Stage 3 is as they're starting to develop, planners will go out and
Right.
take a look at. But this would be the final discretionary approval. They would have design review approval, and then they would start to build. We would have a planner, and that's what we call Stage 3, that would go out in the field and check as they're constructing.
Right.
And then a final, stage 4 would be a final planner review of the design.
Then stage 3, there are more calculation, more real drawings, but again, stage 1, I thought maybe it will be easier for the public and for us that they come and generally tell us what they want to do, and they go further to stage 2 or 3 and beyond. So this way, they don't spend lots of time and money, and they don't waste their money. That's why this is like another project on Broadway. There was a stage 1 they brought forward, and then now they're working for the balance of it. Thank you anyway.
Okay.
You may continue.
So the proposal is to construct a 48-foot tall, 3-story, approximately 14,000 square foot commercial office building with 2 levels of parking. The applicant is Alan Malikian with Malikian and Associates. Staff has analyzed the project against the DSP standards and guidelines. A detailed analysis is attached as Exhibit 2 with the staff report. As proposed, the project complies with the new DSP standards and zoning requirements, including parking, and no variances are required. The project site is located mid-block on the east side of Central Avenue between Lexington Drive and California, within the DSP Orange Central District. Currently, the site features a commercial parking lot that will be demolished to make way for the new office building. The Armenian Consulate is located directly to the north of the project site. The South Glendale Historic Resource Survey identifies this property as being eligible for national, state, and local listing. The project will obscure the side facade of the consulate building from view and will change the immediate visual setting. All other aspects of the consulate building will remain intact, and the project will not impact its ongoing eligibility for historic designation. The blocks along the east side of Central Avenue between Doran and Wilson are located in the Orange Central District of the DSP. The area surrounding the project site is developed with high-density multifamily residential buildings on the north and east, and a combination of mixed-use residential and commercial buildings along Central. In regards to site planning, the building does occupy the majority of the site with the pedestrian entrance oriented towards Central. Parking will be provided in a multi-level parking structure accessed from the alley at the rear. As it relates to building setbacks, Central is designated as a mixed-use commercial frontage, which has an 18-foot setback requirement. This includes a 5-foot parkway, 10-foot sidewalk, and 3-foot building adjacent zone. The building is set back the required distance from Central. In addition to widening the sidewalk and improving the parkway with new landscaping, the project also features at-grade landscaping in the building adjacent zone that enhances the pedestrian environment. Parking will be provided in a multi-level parking structure with vehicular access from the existing alley at the rear. The alley access will have 2 driveways, one to the subterranean parking level and one for the at-grade parking level. The project features a total of 25 parking spaces. This includes 7 tandem and 16 bicycle parking spaces. Per code, the project requires 28 parking spaces and 1 bicycle parking space. Non-residential uses in the DSP can provide up to 25% of the required parking as tandem. For this project, a maximum of 7 tandem spaces are permitted, and that's what's proposed. A parking reduction of 1 space for every 5 bicycle parking spaces provided in excess of the required minimum is also permitted in the DSP. The project is providing the 1 required bicycle parking space plus 15 additional spaces, thereby allowing for a reduction of 3 parking spaces. The second floor features multiple tenants and a balcony oriented towards the north. The third floor features 1 tenant and multiple balconies along the sides and the rear. As it relates to mass and scale, the 3-story, 48-foot tall project is a lower scale proposal than allowed by the DSP standards for the Orange Central District. The maximum allowed by right would be 95 feet tall and a 3.0 FAR. The proposed building has appropriately incorporated the required architectural elements that reinforce pedestrian activity and add visual interest. Many of the new DSP standards related to mass and scale and open space do not apply to this project, primarily because of the small-scale nature of the new development and the 50-foot lot width in contrast to the larger development sites located in the immediate area. The building's massing is designed to defer to the two-story historic building to the north, the Armenian Consulate Office. The third floor has been pushed to the south side of the building to allow the mass to step down toward the historic building and provide an appropriate transition between the two. A condition of approval is recommended to improve this transition by deleting the third floor balcony at the northwest corner of the building and lowering the height of the corresponding wall at the property line. The new office building is a modern design that uses architectural solutions such as building materials, offset massing, and windows to articulate the street-facing facade and address the public sidewalk. The project features high-quality materials and a color palette that reinforces the modern design concept. The paving materials at the primary entrance are not distinguishable at the ground floor, which is a DSP requirement. A recommended condition of approval will require the paving materials to be revised to address this. The street facade features a curtain wall system with multicolored glass subdivided into smaller units that provides a lively and differentiated pattern. The street-facing facade also includes perforated metal screens, projecting metal fins, and a decorative grille of horizontal metal bars at the main entry. These features are placed in front of the curtain wall to provide texture and a sense of depth. Other aspects of this facade, such as the two-level canopy between the first and second floors, the stair tower, and the deep roof eave, are clad with metal and well integrated into the overall design. The side elevations feature masonry blocks with projecting squares that will provide ever-changing shadow patterns and break down the scale of what would otherwise be large monolithic walls. Staff has received comment letters from a tenant in the office building to the south, as well as the Glendale Historical Society. These comment letters were provided to you for your consideration and are also on file with the Planning Department as part of the public record. Overall, the project design is consistent with the DSP Orange Central District standards and guidelines. Staff recommends approval of the Stage 1 and 2 design review application with conditions. That concludes my presentation. Staff is available for any questions.
Thank you.
I have some.
Is this something you will present later, 340 Central Office Building? There are more information.
So that is a copy of the applicant's presentation. I believe he's on
Oh.
the line. Yeah.
I see. This is applicant's presentation, all right. Okay.
I have a question.
Councilmember Najari.
I have a question. I thought tandem parking always had to be in multiples of two.
No.
So you'd have like, is one of the spaces a three-car tandem?
Well, if you look at the parking plan, at the ground floor, they are going to be in multiples of two because you can access them from the alley
Okay.
and that one area where there's 4 tandem spaces. And then at the ground floor, same, or at the subterranean level.
So they're putting in 7 tandem spaces.
Correct.
So is that 7 times 2 is a total of 14 spaces?
No, they have 7 spaces that are total that are tandem. So those aren't directly accessible. They're tandem with the space in front of it.
Okay, so here's my thing. 2, 2, 2, and 1, or 2, 2, and 3?
2, 2, 2, and 1.
So why is the 1 considered tandem?
It's the configuration, if you look, I think you're referring to page 16, if you look at how they're accessed.
Page,
Page 16.
I mean, I'm not trying to be,
At the ground level.
okay.
So you have the spaces 6 and 7, that's one pair of tandem.
I'm on page.
Page 16.
16.
So you see there's spaces 6 and 7. So
Yes.
7 is tandem with 6, 9 is tandem with 8, and then 11 is also tandem with space number 9 at the rear, which is actually a turn-in from the alley, because that entire area is open. And that does comply with code.
So 9 and 10 together, right? That's 9 and 10 are tandem, 6 and 7 are tandem, and 8 and 9 are tandem.
Correct.
So that's 2, 4, 6.
Well, I mean, it's technically 1, 2, 3. These are the 3 tandem spaces, and then there's 4 on the subterranean level.
Okay, so when you say tandem, tandem means a spot for 2 cars.
Correct. Well, the space is considered tandem.
Okay. So when we say that up to 25% of the spaces can be tandem, doesn't that mean that 25% of, in this case, 25 would give us something around 6?
It's 28 because that's the code required parking.
Okay. I mean, when we count tandem, doesn't tandem constitute the total number of cars as one?
The calculation is taken from the total number of required spaces. So it's taken from the 28 spaces, so they're implementing this tandem parking allowance plus the 3-space parking reduction.
I think we're counting it wrong. I mean, when I vote on tandem, I count tandem as being not the space, but the number of cars that park in that space. So when you say there's 7 tandem spaces, I'm thinking there's 7 cars, but you're saying there's up to 14 cars.
Well, it's 7 tandem spaces, but yes, it would affect 14 parking spaces.
So if 14 spaces are tandem, 14 out of 25 is greater than half. Is that the way you guys, is that the way you guys, wait, this is an issue for me because not necessarily on this, but when I've been counting tandem spaces, a tandem means 2 cars. And the issue is that you don't have to have a separate drive-in for each one. Phil, am I wrong on this? Turn on my light bulb because when I read 25 spaces and a quarter of those can be tandem, to me that means that 6 cars may be parked in a tandem manner, which means you have 3 2-car spaces,
I believe, well,
You got to get closer, Phil.
not 6 2-car spaces.
I think that's the way that how do I answer that? I think in this case, let's say the 28 spaces, 25% of those can be tandem, in a tandem configuration, is the way that we would look at this. If I'm not mistaken, this is something we want to explore
So,
with the council as part of the DSP review. How do you want to really do that? Because
well, but listen here, it doesn't make sense at all. If, let's say the amount of parking required is 24 spaces, and the code says you can have up to 50% tandem, that means all the parking in the building would be tandem? Right?
again,
Because you've got 12. Oh, that's very,
and
That's-
and that's why I say the way that the code is written
that makes no sense at all.
is you can take 25 of them, 25%, and put them in a tandem configuration.
Okay,
Which gives you something closer to half. And that's what we have identified as something that the council really should look at for the very reason that you're bringing up.
that's totally
But it
contrary
is-
to the plain meaning of the language and the sense behind it. So a 50% rule, let's say if our rule was 50% can be tandem, that means all the parking in the building would be tandem.
You could, yes.
Now, how does that make sense?
But that's what.
Seriously.
That's why
How
it's
does that make sense?
25%. And it's
That
why
makes
we
no
want to
sense
come
to
it
me.
back, bring it to you. But the code
Okay,
today
maybe
allows
that's
that.
not today's discussion. We'll have that another time. I want you to know that I
No,
find
but
it
would you
very.
like to clear that before?
Well,
you
no, as I
progress?
understand that there are 7 tandem
That's what I thought.
spaces
Yes.
that account for 14 cars.
Right.
Which is more than half of the cars being parked tandem, which is in conflict with our code when it says 25% of the spaces can be tandem. How are they going to turn around that tandem in the floor plan on 16? It's very tight. How are they going to turn around and make that parking?
So as proposed, it does meet the minimum of the code required turnaround areas. We do recognize that it will be tight. Part of the DSP requirements when you do use tandem parking spaces requires that a parking attendant be on site at all times during operation. So that could alleviate some concerns. They're the ones that are parking the
Okay.
cars.
So during their management of it, we're going to have to trust them to keep the valet service or the valet parker going.
Yes.
And when they say that they're going to do that, it's a matter of credibility then that we have to believe them to do that.
That that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
No, but.
I'm going to quit
on that
talking for now.
Question of parking attendant, I don't want to talk about this project generally. When we say, do we are able to go back, let's say, 3 years later, not for this project, any project which has been approved before, we can go back and say, like, how we can make sure that they had an attendance, unless they have document to provide, how this works?
Currently, we don't have a program in place, Mayor Agajanian, members of the city council, whereby we would randomly go back, let's say, to a development to see if what council ultimately approved is still in place based on the things that they said they would do in terms of parking. Typically, what would happen is that if some of the things that they said based on parking, having a valet attendant who is present is not there, and you have issues in terms of parking in the neighborhood, as we've had in the past, those types of complaints would come forward. And once those complaints come forward, whether it's to us directly or by way of the city council, at that point, we would have that mechanism because it would be flagged, and we would pay a visit to see if they're in compliance with what was initially approved.
But how you check?
Pardon?
How you check that there has
Neighborhood-
been an attendance?
Well, I don't know if we wouldn't check in the past, but if there are issues, let's say, by way of parking, and there is no attendant, and they don't have anybody on staff who is dealing with the parking, we would become aware of that because neighborhood services code enforcement would go out, and we would then follow up based on our ability to let them know that that's based on what was approved by council, and the type of parking that was approved, they are supposed to have an attendant on site. But that would be complaint-driven. It would not be something that we would automatically do.
That's hard to, I don't know. Now, what we do with this tandem, because tandem, I thought also that it's like 7 cars
back.
might be 2 behind each other, not, means 14. 7? And it should be the balance of.
See if I can explain it this way. The tandem space would be the one in front. The one in back, it's in a tandem configuration, but it's a fully accessible space. So it's counted as a normal parking space. So you're able to have up to 25% of them in a tandem configuration.
Meaning blocked from,
I'm sorry,
meaning they're blocked somehow.
meaning
but-
25% of them would be blocked. And that's why there's the requirement for the parking attendant.
I see. So anyway, 25% means those who are blocked.
That's
Not the
okay.
car in behind it is not part of the being tandem, right?
That's how the staff interprets
Well,
it.
It's not blocked,
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah.
It is parked in a tandem configuration because there's a car in front of it.
Right.
But it's not blocked and you can move it out.
Right.
Regardless, there are cars in front that are blocked and you need the parking attendant.
Okay. In essence, there are 7 of them which are blocked.
Yes.
Or the
So
potential-
that's the
potential to
1/4.
be blocked.
Potentially,
Right.
yes.
That's why you have the attendant.
Right.
And
Okay.
again, I can understand, I can see the frustration, and that's why we want to bring this back to you with the DSP review.
Is that an industry-accepted definition of tandem? That's what I want to know. Or is this something particular to Glendale?
Or is
So
it
by
a
your definition,
Glendalism?
it's actually impossible to have 100% of the spaces tandem. Correct? Because 50% would max it out. And what, I mean, when you use the word percent with tandem, with regard to a total number, the way we're using it is completely wrong. It's complete, I mean, it's a misapplication of the definition. And if we meant it to be something different, then we should have said something different. But when you say 25% tandem is 50% of the cars that they're required to put in, that's just, I'm just saying. I don't know why it has taken now to understand this. I don't, does anyone else share this issue with me? Maybe it's just today, I don't know.
Is there any other comments?
Yeah, I wanted,
Councilmember Devine, I don't
Yes.
remember this ever happening in any of the other buildings that we've had before us, that we've noticed this sort of problem with this many tandems. Excuse me.
But generally now, I remember tandem is how many is blocked. That's the way it is. 7 tandem is 7 of them are blocked.
But when they use the word percent then, it's
Yeah.
completely misleading.
Okay. Mr.
Okay.
Broughton.
I understand.
all right, so this is my first design review, so I'm going to ask
You're on right
maybe
track
some
now.
basic questions here. But, so in general, the building looks nice to me. I'm the kind of guy who doesn't know what shirt goes with what pair of pants, so I'm probably, not the best person to judge, but it looks okay. The thing that is worrisome is this, proximity to the Armenian consulate, which is, I understand, historic. What did we say? It's potential. It's a potential national register of historic.
It's identified in the South Glendale survey as eligible for national, state, and local listing. So by definition, it's considered a historic resource. It's just not designated.
Okay, so it's considered a historic resource. How far is that wall of the building from the consulate? What's that space? Because it looks like basically it's like right up against it.
The side setback
Yeah, the
is
side.
the term of art,
Okay. See, I don't know this stuff yet.
Six.
I'll get there.
right? Am I right?
Yeah.
I know that much. I think it's right on the line.
It looks like it might be less than a foot. The designer applicant, Alan Malikian, he's going to give a presentation. He could verify the exact number for you if you'd like to. He's on the line to present, so that question may be better directed to him. I think it's less than a foot
Less than a foot.
to the property line, but he can verify that. The number's not clear.
No,
on
to the other building. I mean, building to building, wall to wall.
I would defer to the designer, Mr. Malikian, on that.
Okay. And then the other, so the other thing is the excavation to put in that parking structure, subterranean parking structure. So, I've gotten a number of emails about, concerns about that. How far would that excavation reach? How close to the property line or how close to that historic building would the excavation go?
Again, that would be a question, I think, better suited for the designer. It's not something we typically review as part of the project design. Mr. Malikian could answer
Okay,
the
and-
specifics of those questions.
Okay, so I have those questions out. Now, one other thing is, so staff says that this will change the immediate visual setting of the historic building. Is that right?
That's what's in the report.
Right, that's what staff says. And my understanding is that visual setting is one of the several elements that go into the definition of integrity under CEQA. Is that your understanding too?
Mr. Platt, who's our historic preservation planner, he's actually on the line. He could answer that question for you.
Mr.
Yes,
Garcia?
can everyone hear me?
Yes, 1 second.
Great.
Mr. Garcia, you were going to say something?
No, now that Jay's
Okay.
on the line, I'm.
All right, please go ahead.
Okay, so Councilman Broadman, you're correct that there are 7 aspects of integrity that are identified by the National Park Service, and these are part of our discussion of whether a building maintains its integrity. Setting is one of those 7. I could go through all of them if you want. I don't know if that's necessary.
It's okay.
What will happen when we said the visual setting will change, it's because it's obvious. We're not going to be able to see the side facade of the historic building any longer, and there's going to be a taller building next to it. But I would argue that while that does change some aspects of its setting, its primary setting is as an urban building that's built out toward the street, that faces a courtyard, and then faces toward the intersection. So when you think about this building, you're really thinking there's this courtyard, it's an L-shaped building that embraces that courtyard. All of those aspects of its setting are still going to be present, but we are losing part of its setting. But many projects will affect aspects of integrity, and there's no requirement from the National Park Service that you have to maintain every aspect of integrity. In fact, some of them are rather subjective kind of analyses. So I'm very comfortable saying that this meets 5 aspects of integrity completely. One aspect doesn't even apply to this building, which is the one called association, which means association with any significant people or events. And setting is somewhat altered, but not completely altered. And I believe that this will still be completely eligible for national, state, or local listing, even with the construction of this project.
Okay, I guess still, if it is impacting the integrity, it seems to me that there should be a CEQA review to determine whether there's any way to mitigate that impact to integrity. And I know the report says it's categorically exempt, and I'm not convinced.
Maybe, I think at some point, obviously, we'll have further discussion on this. It'd probably be useful to hear from the applicant also. The only thing I would say, the only point I would add is, and this is, Jay said it, but I think from the planning perspective, and I'll say from the legal perspective, is changing the existing visual setting from the CEQA perspective is not the test. What the courts would look at on the CEQA perspective is whether or not it's materially impairing the historic nature of the property, including it could just by virtue of it materially impairing its existing setting. And I think so. There's a difference in scale between changing the setting and actually materially impacting it in such a way that you're affecting the historic nature of the building. And as Jay said, you have to look at all the elements, not just one criteria, in determining whether or not the historic nature, the eligibility criteria are being materially impaired, as opposed to just changing the ability to see the building from one particular location.
Right, who determines whether it's material or not?
I mean, ultimately, it's up to the decision makers. That's you. But you do have to have some substantial evidence in the record to beyond just change, in our view, that it's materially impacting the historic nature of the building, as opposed to just changing it or adding to it in a certain way. But it is a criteria. It's a decision of the council in this case, but you have to have evidence that it is doing so, and we just urge you to exercise caution in making that finding.
I mean, it's completely blocking that entire side, so there's no visibility of one entire side of this historic building. To me, that seems pretty material.
When you think, this is Jay Platt again, when you think about buildings on commercial streets in urban areas, it's very rare that you actually see the side facades until you get to the corner building. It's hard to imagine that, we don't want to have a lot of surface parking lots, what we call missing teeth in the street wall, the streetscape. This just happens to have been a parking lot since the 70s.
Prior to that, it was a single-family house and a garage, so it's kind of a strange situation, but it's not unusual at all for new construction to hide side facades in kind of downtown areas.
I mean, it just seems to me that there should be a study to look at this. I'm not comfortable saying that this is exempt from CEQA. Anyway.
I mean, to me, I mean, this, especially in this situation, the historic building being Armenian Consulate General building, three sides of it, the west, the east, and north, are visible. And this new building is not attached to the Consulate General's building. There is this tiny gap
Right,
between
tiny.
the two buildings. It's not attached. So still, you can see the south side of the building. So that's why if it goes to that if it would be attached to the south side, then I would be concerned. But since it's not attached and there is a gap and it can be seen, if you go by the building, you can see that south facade. I think, to me, it looks okay.
Wait, which one
and
is this?
especially, this is not accepted as historic building anyway. The Consulate General
It is
no, it's, I guess,
considered a
is
historic resource.
considered-
It's, for CEQA purposes, it's considered historic resource, because under the criteria under CEQA, it is, but it's not registered on any of the registers. Correct?
Correct.
So, yeah, it's on our survey, it's on the downtown survey probably.
but it's not registered.
It's not registered. But you still have to look, you have to consider it a historic resource for purposes of doing CEQA. And I think that's
Oh.
the point.
Okay.
Again, to reiterate that in an urban setting like this, projects that are not actually demolishing or rehabbing it to the extent that you're eroding its historic nature, project that's next to it, you're going to see this a lot, and you have to look at the overall criteria, not just one criteria. Any project that's adjacent to a historic building, then I think we'd be stuck doing environmental reviews because any building next to a historic structure is going to somehow impact the view of that building from some point of view. And that's not, as we look at it, that's not the test for requiring to do an additional level of CEQA review, where there's no project itself is not related to this, is not directly the historic resource at issue.
Okay,
And
one
so I
more.
just want to add, like, from a legal perspective, if as an exemption, we feel it clearly meets the test of being exempt, because it is not materially impairing the historic resource.
One more question I have. There is a gap, I think, how far this north wall of the new building is, the distance between north wall of the new building and the Consulate General building, what's the gap between the two? It said, somebody said it before.
Oh, actually, it's not clear on the plans. The applicant, Alan Malikian, I think he
Oh,
could answer that question.
okay, he's
yeah.
here. I just want to know what's the gap. And I want to know if this building is attached to the south side or not. Mr. Malikian, you want to go ahead and answer some of the questions which has been raised in here?
Mayor, I have to put him on the line.
Okay.
Are we, are we done with, I think we should just do this in an orderly way, Mr. Mayor. If the council's done with the questions, or wants to ask your questions of Mr. Malikian, when we bring Mr. Malikian on the line, let him do his presentation, and then as part of that, he can answer the questions and answer any follow-up questions, rather than just asking him to cut right into the questions. It'll be a little disjointed for him and for you. So if that's okay, when we get Mr.
I'm
Malikian
okay
on
if
the
he
line,
does his presentation.
just allow him to do his
Okay,
presentation.
let's do
and then we'll
the
ask the questions.
presentation and then we ask questions.
But I don't know if Mr. Brahman had any more
Let's,
questions.
no, let's go.
Yeah.
Mr. Malikian, you're live. Can you hear me? Mr.
of all, I want
Milligan?
to thank everyone, and I'm hoping that you can hear me. I'm just talking on the phone, so I can, and there's a delay. So, hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Milliken.
Oh,
We can hear you, Mayor.
perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. This is a very extraordinary presentation. I appreciate staff working with us and Vista and everybody has been amazing and working through this downtime and kind of using the emails and everything else, trying to kind of go back and forth, trying to figure out all the issues and concerns and solve the problem. So I don't want to drag this too long, and I want to start the presentation. I put together a PowerPoint, and hopefully that can be brought up on screen, and I will walk through. And my presentation is not going to be designed to repeat what Vista, which she's done an amazing job explaining the project. It's more of emphasizing some of the elements that should be noted on the project. So hopefully that PowerPoint can come up and we can see.
We got it.
Yeah.
Mr. Milliken, can you see your PowerPoint on TV?
I do not see the PowerPoint, so I'm
Delayed.
assuming that you guys are
We see
looking
it.
at that. So.
It's on.
It's on.
Okay. So, let's go to the third page, and I want to emphasize. So this is one of the earlier or the first projects that has come up in the DSP. We had gone through in the past looking at the different scenarios and different things that we would adjust. And this, I have to say, this is one of the earlier projects that I worked with staff, and we came up with a lot of these elements that are now being implemented. One of the things I also want to highlight is that there's several dedications that are happening from a small lot, which is about a 9,000 square foot. It's becoming less of so we're taking about 300 square foot out of the equation as well. The height, which is what we are allowed to have, is a 95 foot in the zone. What we're proposing is a 48 foot in the zone. The FAR, which will allow us to, by right, we can go 27,000 plus square foot of building. We're proposing 14,000 of 14,000 and change. And I'll explain where we're essentially removing to address some of the off-site conditions that we thought, especially the Armenian Council is building. The next slide, I guess there is a delay. What you see is an overall diagram and a scale of an entire streetscape. And what you have is a proportion building, and the next slide would be to show you the outline or the diagram that we placed in. This gives you a diagram and outline of the building and gives you the scale and the proportion of all the buildings that are within the surroundings. Next slide gives you a diagrammatic outline of where these buildings are, both adjacent, how we try to address this. We purposely push the ground level, the retail portion back far enough to allow the building that is right now, all the images, everything that is being shared online and everybody is sharing, everything is being shared as a bird's eye perspective, which I think everybody should remember that we are seeing these buildings on a human scale and human eye level, which is a 6 foot. And at the end, I'll share some renderings that I've done and give you a perspective of what that will look like. Staff has that. I've shared that with them prior to the hearing. So the emphasis that I want to bring in is the landscaping we added on with the new DSP zoning guidelines, as well as the setback, the additional setback that we're doing to emphasize or give homage to the building adjacent to the building itself. The next slide, again, the setback, the different materials, the outdoor area that we've created gives a little bit of a better sense of the retail presence and that level. I'm not going to get into the parking or anything. I think Phil, the last explanation really covered. And Mr. Najarian, the tandem, it is a standard use at every city, and so it's not something new that we can talk about that later. So as far as the next slide, what we've done is all the carving and all the square footage that we've taken out of this building, we've tried to look at how we can minimize the scale towards the north of the building, creating a balcony and making sure that the balcony starts and the height does not go above the roof line or within the same ridge line of the building itself. You'll see some perspectives later on in the slide, and it'll allow you to understand what we mean by this perspective. The second slide, or the third floor, is we reduced the square footage of the building. We've pushed both sides of the building in 10 feet plus to allow us to give a better sense of scale, reduce the height, as well as reduce the mass. That, again, emphasizing and addressing the low-scale one-story building structure that we have on the north. The elevation diagram that we have gives you a scale proportion of what the building and how it's stepping up, and how you have a 3-story away on the south side, away from the 1-story building that is on the north side. The next perspective gives you the backdrop that we've created with the wall that we have, and be able to emphasize or reduce the mass along the north side by the balcony, and also the stepping back in the front of the balcony, so that both the perspective as you're looking at from the street, as well as you're looking at from the side streets, you will see the less of a mass that is looming over the building itself. The materials that we've chosen and the materials that we picked, we've looked at a variety of different materials, and the quality that we've chosen, the Alucarbon, the aluminum cladding, the storefront, the various colors of storefront that we've used. The front facade, we realized that the front facade has always been the emphasis, but knowing, being conscious of the side large walls that we have on the property line, those were built out of blocks, but then rather than creating, like Vista explained, we've added the texture that we thought that it would bring some interest to that wall and create some effects and shadows of the normal wall that you would see in the large masonry wall. Materials, again, range, as it was explained into the meeting, but I need to highlight that wherever we had a chance to give presence or give the opportunity to bring the building to the next level, we've introduced the higher quality materials, the front and the back, and also the stepping of the third floor, and introducing the window, the glass, the wrapping around the glass, and so forth. I have a video that gives you a couple minutes of video that takes you all around and gives you a really good perspective of what we have presented to you. So there's a delay on the video, so I don't know if we're right on the time, so we can get started on that. So this was the video that I've created and kind of give you an idea as far as all around. It gives you a really good perspective of what we're dealing with. I also rendered 2 images in reference to the letter that we received from the Historic Society, and I wanted to address a couple of their concerns. So if I can have the Street View 1 image opened up, please. Is it open?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So there's some conversation and discussion about the massing and the scale that it was brought up by Historic Society. And I wanted to address that item first. And I wanted to kind of emphasize this perspective, this rendering is shot at 6-foot eye level. So essentially, if you're standing right by the side curb on the street edge, you look towards that, the building has been pushed back far enough, and the second floor is tall enough that the volume, if the tree is matured and it's not trimmed as it is right now, you'll be able to see the building itself without having any kind of an impact. So the concern or the question, the highlighted portion of the letter that we received to completely eliminate the top portion, essentially what we're going to be doing is that we're exposing more sky to be able to see it. We're not really removing the building to be able to emphasize the structure, the historic building. What that's going to do is it's just going to have, you're going to have a better view of the 4- or 5-story or 6-story building across the street on the other side of the historic building. The view number 2 gives you a perspective standing in the corner and looking south. Now, again, the question is, do we push back the balcony on the top level, which what staff is recommending, or the second floor back, which Historic Society is recommending, to be able to emphasize or create a less of an impact to the building? Again, pushing the building's volumes back or the balcony back, you're still going to have the 3-story building behind it. The gap that we have between the building, the narrowest part of the building and our proposed building is a little under 6 inches, about 5 3/4. And that gap is going to be adjusted or verified by the structural engineer once the engineering starts, because of the deflection that we're going to have and the weight of the building and so forth. But from our experience, the 6 inches should be more than enough. The gap will be maintained and the opening will remain. There was another question or consideration or comment with the Historic Society that the materials that were being proposed should add brick or terracotta material. I respectively disagree with that. Creating a building that matches or comes close to the color of the materials of what we have historically there it's not the solution. You cannot find the same brick, you cannot find the same type of a craftsmanship, nor you can find the same color textures or whatever. And what you're going to do is we're going to confuse everything, and it's going to create a mess. I think what we have is we have a new and the old, a very clean break, and we are carving away from our proposed building to say there is a structure here to represent the building itself. So I think we have achieved this very successfully by addressing the ground level, by addressing the people who are going to be viewing this and experiencing this space. There was a very long note and comment addressing or questioning about the structural integrity of this. I forwarded that request. I forwarded that to our structural engineer, Charles Tan, which is a structural engineer, not a civil engineer. And he has commented on this, and I don't know if staff has shared this with everyone with the comment that we received back. I can go ahead and read that if you like. If not, then I just want to kind of a summary of that. The design is going to be, I can read through it. It's a short paragraph if you want.
Thank you.
Would you like me to read that?
Okay, if you wish, read it.
So this is quote unquote from Charles Tan, our structural engineer. The temporary earth shoring will take into account all the load demands from the earth and any surcharge from the adjacent structure, namely the one-story masonry building. The design will also ensure the expected shoring drift to be within the allowable limits. In addition, the piles will be monitored to ensure that the drifts are actually within the allowable limits. The implemented design should be ensured that the adjacent structure are adequately protected from the excavation. I want to assure everyone that there's going to be several checks and balances from the SOLS engineer to the structural engineer to the city engineers to everyone that is going to be the contractors. Everyone's going to be, the last thing we want to do is cause any damage to the building itself. So quite an effort is going to be placed to assure the preservation of the building and make sure that there's no damage and proper excavation and proper shoring and so forth. And whatever other recommendation the council would have, we'll be more than happy to implement if there is anything that we have missed. But as an architect, as an engineer, the last thing we want to do is cause damage to a historic building, let alone any building. Lastly, I wanted to talk about just quickly regarding the width. There was a question regarding the width that was highlighted, 48'11". The 48'11", again, it reflects the setback or the gap that we are going to have from the property line for the building deflection. That will adjust, but right now, as a placeholder, we have enough that should not change from this point. It may actually be a little bit more, depending on what it is, if the deflection comes into question. The two comments that staff had, a recommendation. The second recommendation of the material, of the ground level material, I'll be more than happy to obey by that, and we'll provide material samples or the cut sheets to staff during the plan check process. They'll review that. As far as eliminating the balcony on the north side, again, we think that by pushing back the third floor balcony back almost about 8 feet back, what it did was it reduced the scale and the mass that from the street side, which would be the most impactful. As you come around the building to the street corner, the elimination of the 4-foot railing and the balcony, in our opinion, it's not going to create that dramatic effect, other than create a very unusable space. Remember that we could have pushed that third floor out towards the north property line to gain square footage. We're putting on the table about 13,000 square foot of that unusable. Obviously, we have to provide parking and so forth. But the point is to create a rentable, a functional space. We've created a smaller space up on top, but by creating a well-lit, which is a north-facing light and north-facing balconies, it allows a better rentable and usable space for the tenants. So eliminating that, especially facing the street side, we think that it's going to definitely impact the leasable quality or the quality of the space that we've created on the third floor. Is there any questions for me?
Any question for Mr.
I have
Melukian?
some questions.
You have question?
Yes, I have some questions. Alan, this is Ara Najarian. On the south side of the Armenian consulate, there are windows, aren't there? Both on the
Yes,
first
there
and
are.
the second floor?
Yes.
Are those going to be,
Mr. Attorney, that's a great question. That's one thing I missed mentioning in the historic report. Well, as I said, there is going to be a gap. So theoretically, the windows, the wall is not going to be built right on the property line, nor it's going to build right in, like literally close down the window. You have to remember per building code, even though it's historic, and I understand that there's a historic level, and I don't want to get into the code-related issues of the historic preservation and historic level that the building has. But as a building and safety, you cannot have any openings along the property line, period. That is not allowed. And that is a code issue of certain level, and there is historic exemptions that can be applied for the building. So any building, any structure, any type of a use that comes into this vacant building, vacant property, our property, we cannot control the only thing that we can control is create a wall that is fire rated and be able to protect any kind of a fire transfer from our property to their property. So that's the only thing that we can do, which we've done by creating a masonry wall. There is about a 42-inch step in the front portion of the consulate building. That is almost 42 inches back, but that goes back about 20-something feet, and then from there it jogs towards the property line. Yes, there are some wrought iron gates or wrought iron closures in front of the windows. I don't know the impact of those. They're literally protruding onto the neighbor's property. So saying that, it's okay, that's I think it's more of a civil matter, and rather than, but again, if that needs to be stayed or that needs to stay, some sort of an easement, something has to be implemented, which I don't think it's correct, and I don't think anybody will agree to that.
so my point is that those windows are going to be blocked, and I'm blocked from light and air. And what if there's a fire? I know when I had to put windows in my house, the fire department came and said, well, every room or bedroom needs to have so much of a large opening so a fighter can get in or you can get out. So on that whole south side, it's going to be just except for a matter of a few inches, 5-6 inches, as you said, it's just going to be a block wall.
Yeah, that's a great point. As far as I can't analyze the building itself, and I can't analyze the fire quality of the building itself. But as it stands right now, it's already blocked. So if there is a fire, they cannot exit because of the gates that are in front of the window. So if there was a concern, that should have been addressed a long time ago. That's one.
But even on the second floor? The gate doesn't go up to the second floor, that fence, does it?
The second floor, 1 second, let me...
I mean, I think it's maybe, 10 foot high? I mean, we've been there. I don't have a picture of it exactly, but...
On this. That's it.
Is it on these slides?
I mean, it looks like it ends at when your second floor platform begins. So I'm assuming that's 10 feet.
Approximately.
I mean, I know you're building up to the property line.
Yeah, so the building itself and the 2 stories and the thing is, the openings are on the property line. So we have no control over the code issues that the building has, and obviously it has historic level of value to this, and the openings and so forth. But if the fire is an issue, by us building a wall or not, they have an opening on their own property line, which is not allowed by code, period.
They're probably
And so
grandfathered.
technically, if there's a fire, they have to jump to the neighbor's property, and in order for us to eliminate that, then that means the neighbor needs to sell a portion of their lot so that they have a fire exit access. And so how does that
Well, I was just
work?
asking, I
And
mean,
how we-
the aesthetics, I guess I'm just pointing out that there's aesthetics, light, air, as well as fire
Right.
safety issues.
Right.
That's all.
I'm just curious, did you talk to the embassy staff, the consul general, that this is what you're going to have next to them?
I have not personally reached out to them. The project owner and the developer, I do not believe they have. I am not certain, but there was nothing there for.
It's going to be an
for us
international
to-
incident, Ellen.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried when you have.
You know, I'm just a designer. I'm not
I
gonna be getting into the international incident here. I'm sure they will be able to contact them and talk.
So the reason I'm asking, because the balcony you have, I have no problem with that balcony, but it's looking toward their building. I mean, I thought that should be a concern of Consulate General. I don't know. If they are not here,
Maybe they don't.
The letter has gone out to them, and the sign has been posted. No one has reached out to us to be able to say there's a concern. I mean, usually when we get, when we hear that there's a concern, we go and reach out, knock on the doors. But if there is no, we literally received the 2 letters from Historic Society and one of the tenants to the south of the building regarding the construction and so forth. So those are the only 2. If we would have received anything or I would be the first to say that we should go meet with them rather than, but there was no concern. There was no, nothing for us to go knock on doors. There's nothing, no issues with them.
However, this is the only Consulate General, as far as I know, is in Glendale. And I don't know, want to see at a later
No, we
time
have
any
some-
We have
incident.
Dominican.
We have-
Oh,
We have Dominican Republic.
Okay, however, probably that's like an apartment building, right? It's not a property lot, it's not a lot.
Dominican is in 500 North Brand,
Okay, inside,
high-rise building.
yeah, inside a big building. So it's safer probably, but this is open all the way. So I don't want any incident, and then they all gonna leave, and they're gonna go to Beverly Hills.
Oh, we don't want that.
Mayor, can I ask?
Yes,
maybe
please.
This is Mrs. Fine.
Yes, Ms. Devine.
Okay, Alan Malekian.
How are you,
This
Mr.
is-
Vaughn?
I'm good,
been a while.
thank you, but listen, I kept thinking, I didn't know that you were the architect, and I should have known that. I love the building. I love the building.
you.
And what I wanted to ask you, when you did your video, that you had
Yeah.
not taken out that second level, had you, that balcony, that they were, the conditions, the delete the
No,
second floor balcony?
I did not.
It was-
Yes. Yeah, the condition that it was brought up. I honestly, I did not take that out because I truly believe that the balcony would not. If I knew that if everybody comes back and says, listen, take the quarter of this building out and then push the entire building back 50 feet, and that's how you're going to reduce the impact of this, then I would say yes, but the project will be dead, period. By removing 4 feet of a parapet, the impact of that, I think what we've done is pushing back. That balcony originally was in the front. It was flush with the front of the facade. What I did was I visually pushed that back far enough, so reduce the balcony from the street side, from central side, so that the volume looks as a 2-story rather than that extra 4 foot that will be most impacted from the street side. As you come around, because of the tree, because of the building, because of everything else, you're truly not going to be able to see the difference of reducing this 4 feet if it's there or not. I mean, really, it's not. I personally, I don't think that's the solution for it. And I think by pushing that from the street side, it gives you the volume, and you saw the perspective that you have. So getting rid of that balcony, how does that gonna create a better presence for the council? I don't understand. It's just completely irrelevant.
Well,
in my opinion.
I'm having a hard time visualizing that, and I was kind of worried that if we did that, it would make it more block-like. You know, the building would take away the modulation of the building, but would it have, or is it that far back that it wouldn't have made a difference?
So if you actually look at this, there's a perspective actually. It's in the PowerPoint presentation. Vista, is it possible to go to number 10?
I believe Arm is going to try and pull slide 10 up.
Thank you.
Okay, while he's doing that, you know, okay, here it is. Now, where is it?
So if on page 10, if you look at the there's a bird's eye perspective that I have from the northwest corner. You see that the third floor balcony that is pushed back, and what it's doing is it's creating a 1-story volume that is cantilevered out. It's flush with the building itself. By literally taking an eraser and pushing that, getting rid of that balcony and getting rid of 4 courses of block, how is that going to reduce the mass other than, like Ms. Devine, that you just said, you're going to create this square box there. Right now, it's like you have a step that is coming from the street. It's modulating and it's creating some interesting effects of up and down and so forth. But erasing that top balcony, I personally don't think it's the solution for us to have. And that's why I did not do that. I wanted to, present my case and let you decide if I should or not. But honestly, I think that's one of the most essentially important parts of the third floor rentable space for the office space. We want to create an office. Nowadays, everybody's working off home, and we want to, now that this is a little bit, we're thinking in advance, and hopefully this thing will get built in a year or two, and everything will be back to normal, and people would want to have a quality Class A office space, which we don't have these types of smaller offices in Glendale that I know of, especially when they have their own private balcony and so forth. So by eliminating that, if it did do anything, I would be the first to say, let's do it. But if it really doesn't, I really think that the impact to the building is going to be, the tenants will be higher, more than the solution for what we're looking for.
Yeah, well, I tend to agree with you on that one, Alan, so I'm not going to make an issue. My problem with this this development is the consulate, and that's such an important building. It's we're talking about the National Registry for Historic Buildings, And here you're going to do all this excavation and digging, and I just am so concerned about the structural, not so concerned about the visual, but the structural damage or impact that this might have. And I was, I'd like to ask if we could have a historical structural engineer take a look at this before we get started. And the reason I'm saying that, Alan, is because in discussions, number one, I was told that, there could be damage. And number two, I was told, well, eventually, if something happens, we'll stop the construction. And I'd rather not get to that place where we have to stop the construction, but know beforehand what the impact is going to be and make sure that we have mitigated that impact. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
No, I understand. Our structural engineer has been involved with many different levels of projects, including, I'm not sure if he specifically specialized in historic buildings, but he is very knowledgeable. He's a structural engineer as a higher level rather than just a normal civil engineer that you will find everywhere else. So as a structural engineer, they're capable of designing high-rises, whereas normal civil engineers can only go up to 5 to 6 stories. So the level, the credibility, the experience, and everything else that my structural engineer is going to be involved in this, I trust them fully. But if there is a peer review that needs to happen, I don't know. I mean, that's something that I need to present, and that's up to the council, you guys, that you need to. But honestly, a structural engineer that is capable, have done projects of sort, and if there's any recommendation that we can get, I'll be more than happy to, obey by that.
Okay. So I'll leave that up to my colleagues. And my last question to you, Alan, is did you ever think of putting solar on the rooftop? It's a nice flat roof and perfect for solar.
Yeah, so we've done it. Actually, absolutely. What we'll do is the placement of the units that we have on the top has been essentially we can relocate any way that we can. There is going to be some placement. I don't know how much of we can get. In the new green building code, it requires 15% of the location of the building of the usage. So the area of the solar gets determined based on the load demand, which is the electrical load demand of the building. So once I determine that, we'll determine the size of the solar, and we will definitely implement that. I would love to have something like that come into the picture. I think it would be a great addition to the building.
Great, Alan. Great. Nice job, Alan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Is there any more questions from the architect? No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Malikian.
Thank you.
So now, any comments from?
Do we have any callers?
You have any more callers?
Yes, we do. We have one more caller.
Oh.
It's Steve Hunt from the Glendale Historical Society.
Mr. Hunt?
Steve? Hold on. Steve, this is Adam. You're live. Mr. Hunt?
Is there any more calls?
Mr. Hunt? There are no calls.
Thank you. Mr. Hunt? Okay. Any comments from my colleagues? Do you have any comments, Mr. Najarian?
Well, I think it was pretty evident in my questioning. I don't like the parking scheme. I strongly dispute the parking 7 tandem equaling 14 spaces as being 25% of the off-street parking required. I've looked at several English language dictionaries, and I don't think that any of the dictionary definitions relate to what staff is interpreting it. Whether that's a universal planning term and it's interpreted that way, then they put one over on city councils throughout the land. I don't like the fact that it's completely blocking the light, air, aesthetics, and exit, emergency exit of a historical building, which is unreinforced masonry.
Right.
And I think it's going to be a problem. I mean, in the event of a fire or earthquake, there's got to be some access to that entire south side. I don't know how else this can be configured. This was a very difficult lot to begin with. I think that's why it sat vacant for decades. This is an ambitious plan. I like the building design itself, but the parking I have an issue with, and the juxtaposition with the Armenian consulate. And apparently, no one has reached out to the Armenian consulate on a personal level to discuss this with them, I think causes some problems. So I'm not prepared to support this at this time.
Ms. Devine?
I'll go after Mr. Brahman. I'm going to hear what he has to say.
Me?
Mr. Buck?
Oh, I mean, I agree with Councilmember Najarian and some of his comments. I think, yeah, the fact that it is, what, inches, half a foot from that consulate building certainly affects the, you know, the visual conditions of that historic resource, and I think it should go through a deeper review. I think a kind of what would you call it? Kind of a focused CEQA would be warranted in this case. And I also have the concerns about the construction of the parking and having that be so close to this old building, you know, unreinforced masonry, and concerned about what that might do to it. So I'm basically in the same boat as Councilmember Najarian.
Thank you. Ms. Devine?
Well, like I said, I like the building. I think the design, the architecture is fantastic. I would like to see a historical engineer come in and do the study of the excavation. That worries me. The tandem parking, also an issue. I mean, I'm sure that Jay Platt or even Alan Malakian could give us buildings, historical buildings in our city that are built right up next to another building. And there hasn't been a problem, where there is no problem. So I don't find that to be an issue. It's the excavation that I worry about, and so I guess I'll go along with my colleagues and not approve.
Okay. I mean, the way it appears, that so nobody can build anything next to a historic building, the way it goes. And the vote is clear, again, regardless what I say, it doesn't matter. But I just don't want to create a situation that nobody can build anything, because we say this is next to a historic building, you can't do it. That land been bare, empty for such a long time. I don't know how long that land been there. So if somebody owns that land and they hold it for a purpose. I mean, I think we are going too far, in my opinion, but however, if there is no more comments, so I want to...
Mayor and council members, I do have two calls. It seems
Okay.
like Steve Hunt did hang up. I am going to go with line number 2, which is Francisca Smith.
Hello,
Francesca.
this is Francesca Smith.
Francesco, you're live.
Thank you. Hi, this is Francesca Smith. I think the council has demonstrated a number of impacts that would be caused to the historical resource next door. One is the setting effect that Staff already acknowledged the design doesn't really defer to it in any way. The architect misunderstood the recommendation for changing the color of the high-quality concrete masonry units to be a color that coincides with the brick. And the biggest thing is the pretty obvious damage to the historical resource that is being just poo-pooed if the applicant is volunteering to keep an eye on things and monitor things. That is absolutely the definition of mitigation monitoring under CEQA. So I think the project should be required to have a focused CEQA review for its historical resources impact. Thanks.
Thank you.
I do have another caller, line 1. Caller, you're live.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. I would like to know who is the owner of this building that you are discussing now on 340 North Central Avenue.
The owner of the building, there is somewhere here.
Are there is she done with her comments or questions? The speaker? Is the speaker
Yes, he has to finish,
Okay, thank you.
and then we might answer. We don't necessarily have to.
She hung up. She's gone.
Oh,
Just wanted to know the owner of the building.
Well, in the staff
okay.
report,
It's in the staff report.
there's a Mr. Galajian and Mr. Kozani.
Okay, is there any more
I
comments?
do have Steve Hunt on line 2. Mr. Hunt, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're live.
Okay, thank you. Steve Hunt, I'm the president of the Glendale Historical Society. I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed project. TGHS does not object to development on the site, but we believe the project should be sent back for a redesign, and that as proposed, it is not exempt from CEQA. CEQA review is triggered when a project could have substantial adverse impact on a historic resource, not when it definitely will have an impact. We have made suggestions regarding the design in our letter. TGHS will comment here on the CEQA process. The new building would be constructed less than a foot from the National Register eligible Consulate General of the Republic of Armenia, and yet staff has found that this construction could not have a substantial adverse impact on the historic building. We disagree. The building is far too close to the historic building and should be set back, if only to allow for maintenance of the exposed brick masonry wall of the consulate and allow some light and air through the windows. It is so close now, it would be impossible to do any types of repair, maintenance, or restoration. But given the narrowness of the lot and the proposed underground garage, any project would require preparation of a mitigated negative declaration to indicate how potential impacts would be reduced to a less than significant level. Staff needs to require a plan for how the historic building would be protected during construction and what measures would be taken if damage to the historic building were to occur. This would be mitigation measure number 1. There's also excavation proposed immediately adjacent to the historic building for the underground parking. There is a very real likelihood the grading activity would cause differential settlement that would impact the almost 90-year-old brick building. This should be obvious. A structural engineer who specializes in historic preservation should be selected by the city to review the proposed work and determine what other mitigation measures would be required to protect the adjacent building. The purpose of CEQA review is to disclose to the public potential impacts to the environment, and if there are impacts, to show how they can be mitigated. These impacts have not been disclosed. The consulate building is an important building architecturally and for its symbolic value to Glendale. Any project that might seriously damage it deserves and legally must trigger a CEQA review. Thank you.
Thank you. More comments?
I do have another caller, Catherine Jerka. Catherine, you're live.
Review the proposed work and determine what other
Catherine?
measures would be required to protect the adjacent building.
Lower the volume.
Catherine,
And
can you
speak.
lower the volume on your TV?
And if there are impacts, to show how they can be mitigated. These impacts have not been.
Catherine, can you hear me?
The building is an important building architecturally and for.
Catherine, could you lower the volume on your TV?
Project that might seriously damage its reserve and legally must trigger subsequent review.
Catherine?
I do have another caller, Catherine Joseph.
Hi, this is Catherine Yurka. I just wanted to say how grateful I am to you for taking the Glendale Historical Society's concerns seriously about this project. We've commented on several projects with underground excavation next to historic buildings, never this close and never brick buildings, and we've really been ignored. And so I really appreciate your conscientiousness about this. I want to read briefly what the National Park Service says. They're the ones who do the Secretary of the Interior standards and the National Historic Register. This is what they say when construction happens next to a historic resource on a different lot. These are the protection involved. First, in the consultation between the historic building owner and the development team to identify potential risks, negotiate changes, and agree upon protective measures. I, too, was really shocked that the owners of the building and the consulate were not consulted. 2, documentation of the condition of the historic building prior to adjacent work. 3, implementation of protective measures at both the construction site and the historic site. 4, regular monitoring during construction to identify damage, to evaluate the efficacy of protective measures already in place, and to identify and implement additional corrective steps. CEQA really requires that these steps be taken in relation to this building. As you all know, it is inches away. So thank you, and I just leave you with that food for thought. Bye-bye.
Mayor, there's one more caller. It's Alan Malikian. He's on line 3. If there's any other questions.
Yes, please.
Do you have questions for him?
No, I don't have questions, but if he wants to
I think he's saying,
make
do you have a question?
another comment, I would like to hear.
Hello?
Alan?
Am I on?
Yes, you're on. You're live.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I wanted to comment on some thoughts and some considerations that for council members before they deliberate their decision. The impact that we're talking about with Ms. Paul Devine that suggested having a consultant be involved that has been, that is a valid mitigation. I believe that can be done, and we can bring that on the team so it will assure everyone else. As far as the impact, the rest of the impact as far as closing windows, egress, and so forth, and setting back and so forth, essentially we are saying that we cannot build on this building, period. The parking will be eliminated, the building width will be eliminated, the driveway will be eliminated. So essentially the project is gone and this property is not buildable anymore in order for us to be able to build. So what we've done is we have tried to build a building and address as much as we can to give homage to the historic presence of that. And as far as the structure itself, let's put aside the idea of this being historic building. Any other building that you build next to has to be mitigated, has to be looked at. We have to make sure that we won't bring any damages to the building. We do go through extra level of review process, engineer review process, and so forth. In this case, we're agreeing that we would bring a structural engineer, a historic structural engineer involved, and be able to look at this and be able to monitor or mitigate any kind of an excavation, or possibly even the beginning or during the engineering design part of that. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear that if Mr. Najarian's direction that the parking was an issue, which the tandem, as Mr. Lazarfane explained, the tandem is the front parking or the back parking, and the standard is the back park. So the parking has been met. As far as the window, the egress, and so forth, that's within their property. So what we're saying is that we have to push the building back far enough so that if they need to exit out of their building, they can jump over the property line onto our property line and be able to exit out. And that's what we're trying to say. And we're trying to say that the building should be set back enough that is possible. So I think it's not possible for us to be able to design a project that will have the proper opening, addressing the openings and so forth. That is not supposed to be there, but that's irrelevant. It is there, and we can't do anything about it. I hear the Historic Society's comments. The best thing that we can do, we can mitigate and monitor and make sure that we do not cause any damage to the building whatsoever during the construction.
Mr. Mayor? Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please, Ms. Devine.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Devine. If they are willing to hire a historical structural engineer, someone that's their expertise, if Mr. Malakian and his developers, et cetera, his clients will contact the owners of the historic building, the consul general of the building, and put solar on top of that building, I will approve the building.
Thank you. Is there any?
You know why? Let me tell you why. Another reason why, Mr. Mayor, because you're right. If we stop this, then no one's going to be able to build on properties that are next to historical buildings, and that's not really fair. I think as long as mitigation is taken into consideration, it can be done. So I'm going to approve the project.
Thank you.
Let me just say, I don't think we're saying it needs to be stopped. We're just saying that it should go through a CEQA process, looking at those structural questions, and also looking at whether there's anything that can be done as far as further, setbacks. And if it can't, then it can't be mitigated. We can still approve it, right? But I just think we should go through that process and see what the issues are, see what potential mitigation approaches are, and then we'll decide. I don't think we're trying to deny this because we don't want anything there. I think we don't want that lot sitting there, right? We want, and it's a nice looking building. We would like to see a building there. So I just think it's just an additional step. I know, nobody wants to go through that, but let's just go through it, see where we end up, and hopefully we can have a project to approve.
Okay, Mr. Garcia, do they have to, I'm sorry, do they have, Mr. Garcia, do they have to go through CEQA process?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of council, any discretionary project has to go through a CEQA process, and your staff is of.
Can I chime in?
Hold on, Mr. Milliken.
Mr. Malikian, hold on.
At some point, we have to let Mr. Malikian have his say, but at this point, we were deliberating, we were ready to vote, and then we started taking these calls, and
Okay,
we're sort of.
let's listen to them. Mr. Garcia first.
Your staff was of the opinion that the project does not materially impair a historic structure, and so the project could be deemed exempt under CEQA. There's a difference of opinion on that amongst the council, clearly. But Yeah, so the project would have to go, so if you're not doing exemption, then you're looking at a negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration, or even an EIR. I mean, we heard the comment that if it can't be mitigated, then the council can still approve it, but that's true, but then you would have to do an EIR, a focused EIR, and then if it can't be mitigated, if you determine that it's going to impair the resource and then it can't be mitigated, then you're talking about doing a statement of overriding considerations, as you know. So there is a CEQA process. I think if you can do, at that point, you're doing an initial study under CEQA to determine whether or not, again, whether or not this is historic. It likely is because it's on our survey. Whether or not the project impairs that resource. You're having that same discussion down the road. And then whether or not, if you conclude in that document that yes, it has the potential to impair a resource, then you're going to have to identify mitigation. And if you can't identify mitigation, then you're going to, and maybe you can, it's a little bit different than demolishing a resource, then you're going to have to do a different level of review. So that's kind of that's the broad parameters of the type of CEQA review you might be doing for this project.
So in brief means what? So
Well, if you're not going to deem the project exempt, if you want the staff to do additional review, you start off doing an initial study, and from there they determine whether or not it becomes a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration or an EIR, focused EIR on the historic issue.
Thank you. Mr. Najarian.
So the point raised by Catherine Yurka, the more that I think about it, this totally impairs the historic resource. They won't be even able to inspect their foundation or their masonry, let alone get in there and repair it if there's some sort of damage due to an earthquake. They can't even get to it. So if you want to talk about impairing a historic resource, you're condemning this building that in case of any sort of seismic activity, let alone jumping out of the window if there's a fire, any seismic activity, it's going to be a goner because they won't be able to see it, and they definitely won't be able to repair it.
Okay.
With 5 inches, I mean, we can do wonders nowadays with robotics, but how are you going to repair a foundation with 5 inches?
That's less than 5 inches.
Well, I'm just...
Okay, thank you. Thank you for explanation. Is there any more comments? So we are done. Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'm not...
Mr. Garcia.
I wasn't sure if they were done, but if you are, the item for you obviously was to approve the project. If council is not going to approve the project, and I don't know where, it sounded like you haven't decided that yet, then we would ask for a motion to continue so that we could prepare findings denying the project and requiring the project to go through some additional CEQA review. And we would ask for that to be continued.
One
so we can bring
second.
that back.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Devine.
Mr. Mayor, that was my motion to let staff do more research and maybe do a mitigated negative deck and make sure that the impacts are either non-existent or can be mitigated.
Thank you.
Well, you would,
Yes, Mr.
you would be
Wright.
doing it, what you call an initial study, right?
Correct.
Not necessarily an MND.
Right, you do the initial study to determine what the impacts are, what the potential impacts are, and then identify the appropriate mitigation, whether or not that can be done, whether there's mitigation for it, and then whether it's a negative declaration or mitigated that gets prepared in conjunction with the initial study.
So we could do the initial study and then come back and discuss the results?
Yes,
How would that
usually-
process work?
Jillian, are you on the line? Let's see if she can. Who?
Ms.
Eric.
Jillian
Or
Van
Eric.
Maiden?
Yeah.
I'm here, sorry.
Yes.
So
Go
is
ahead.
I was just
The question is, could we continue it to do the environmental, to do the CEQA, rather than denying it?
Did you hear?
Yes, we could continue it for additional environmental review. One of the options is to separate stage 1 and 2 to give direction on stage 1, which there's been quite a bit of direction provided so far concerning the design and other things. And part of that direction is to do additional environmental review on the building. So you could conceivably, as an option, approve stage one with the conditions of completing additional environmental review. Normally, the difference between a stage one and stage two approval is that you haven't completed your environmental review at stage one. That's your concept, where you look at your basic site planning and massing components, as was discussed before. And then that is, more detail is brought to that as part of stage two in a final design, along with the environmental review of that project. So that is an option for you as well, because you have both stage one and two in front of you. You could just approve the stage one component with the direction and the conditions, and have it come back for stage two at a later time. So that's another option for you
So
to
if you're
consider.
okay with the basic building mass and scale, you could approve the stage one, subject to the conditions and subject to the additional environmental review.
This is what from the beginning I said, I want to see stage, I was surprised why stage one and two came together. Because usually this is what I have seen in building design, that first you bring the basic principle of it before you go to detail such as has been presented here. So I think that would be the right way to go. So now we are looking
Keeping
at
in mind,
stage one.
stage one is not an approval of the project, it's not a final approval, it's not the
Yes.
final discretionary approval, so you are seeing it come back.
At least the client, I mean, the person who is representing any building, at least they know what they have to do. Basic ideas has been approved before they go further and do all these drawings and bring it forward. So they would come forward and do the basic, they will get basic ideas that what we want to do, and they don't go spend lots of time, and then we say, no, this is not what we want. So however, what you are suggesting, Mr. Garcia, so you want to formulate it, so let's see if
I
we have the
want to make
vote.
sure the other council members are okay with it, I see some.
I'm not going to vote for it. So, I mean, the language of the motion, I think it speaks for itself, but I'm not okay. I mean, if you ask me if I'm
Even
okay.
for stage one?
No,
that-
I don't think it can be done. You're right up against the, anyway, I've said what I said. I don't want to rehash it, but I don't think it's, this design,
But stage one doesn't
Juxtaposed.
say how far we'll be from the historic building even. It's just a concept that this will be like 2.5-story building, will be.
well, this
you
is
know,
their
like-
picture. I mean, this is their concept right here. They've given it to us.
I'll
That's
move the,
because they
Mr.
went
Mayor,
too
I'll
far.
move stage one.
So it'll be
Mayor?
stage one, subject to the
I'll move-
conditions and subject to the environmental review.
Still later, we can say this is not good.
I'll move
But
that.
stage one is just, we're saying it can be a building in there, actually. But because, I mean, what worries me is, we can't stop people. They say, okay, that bare land should stay there forever. I mean, this is what we are saying now. Stage one is that something can be built there. A general idea of what it will look like. I was worried actually because there is an embassy there. I want to make sure that they are aware of this building, especially they have balcony there, and that's in of itself is very dangerous for an embassy or consulate general or whoever comes there. President of Armenia came inside that building. If you remember, this was 2 years ago. Prime Minister of Armenia came, they were inside that building. I mean, this is something that it has to be looked at. Otherwise, they go around and they say that it's a very safe place to have consulate general, and I'm hoping other consulate generals, they may move to Glendale, but if something happens, nobody will come around. So if there is possibility, if you formulated the stage one, maybe we vote on that and later
Well, it needs-
come up with the
needs-
detail of it.
Needs a
Please,
second. might
Mr.
not have it.
I
Yes.
I just am not quite sure. I understand the difference between denying the project, what would come after that, or approving stage one with this initial review. Is that, what is this review? And what does this review have to do with CEQA?
So, and when an applicant comes forward with just stage one, the council is just approving that stage one, that conceptual design, which usually says you're okay with the building mass and scale, the design and concept, and then the applicant is going to go do the CEQA review. If you recall, there have been some other projects that we've done like that. So that's basically what is being suggested, is sort of bifurcate this stage one and stage two approval into just stage one. You're approving the concept. Doesn't mean you're going to approve the project when it comes back. Doesn't mean you're going to not impose additional conditions, such as there be a 5-foot setback, side setback, or 10-foot, to address some of the issues that have been raised. There's no limit on your discretion when it comes back for stage two. It's just approving that concept so that then we have a project description for purposes of doing an initial study. That's all it is. If the council wants, it can not go forward with stage one. It can just continue it and to direct the staff to do the CEQA review for the project as well. That's within your purview as well. I think it's cleaner to do it as a stage one with the environmental review coming after, but that's, I'm not sure, I would suggest you consider the stage one with the direction to do the environmental review, but if there's not the support in the council to do that, then the second option would be just to continue the matter to do the environmental review.
I mean,
So now, can I have?
I would just say, I'm going to cut to the chase. I mean, there hasn't been a second yet for the motion, so unless Mr. Mayor,
I'm
you
trying
want-
to understand it.
Right, and I understand, and
Okay.
that's actually a fair question. So I just, Mayor, you can also second it, and then we can see if there's support for it, or someone can make a substitute motion to just continue the matter to do the CEQA review.
Well, I'll make a substitute.
Or substitute
I'll
motion
make-
to deny the project.
Yeah, I'll make a substitute motion to deny the project.
Okay, and I would only ask that your motion be to continue the item
To make findings.
for us to
To
make
prepare
findings to deny the project.
So you are okay with that?
Well, that's my motion, to deny the project.
Deny it.
And to continue it till we have findings to reflect the rationale.
Okay.
Okay, I'll
On that
second
base,
that.
is there
I'll
a
second that.
There is second, okay? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Brotman,
Yes.
Devine,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
and Mayor Agajanian.
Yes, I just want to mention something. Can we, I don't know if I need second on this, we have to have projects when it coming forward. There should be stage one before we go any further. And so then they don't have to spend lots of money. They will know what they have to do. And then we have to ask them for stage two and then stage three or whatever.
I think we're doing an update on the DSP. We can certainly bring that as part of the consideration. I'll just tell you, when we always tell the applicants they have the right to come to stage one
Right.
first to get the council's pulse before they go through the full stage two.
Yes.
Some applicants just, they prefer to do both together, just
Okay.
depending on their own situation. So that's kind of what happens.
All right, thank you. I guess what we have.
Move
May I
to
have a-
adjourn?
I think, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have second?
Second.
All right, second. So the meeting is adjourned at 5:33 PM. Thank you.